So in this video, we're going to talk about the different types of seams. We basically have 5 seams that we use in a lot of construction of different products. We use a flat fell seam. The uses for that would be something along the lines of decorative pillows, anything that you would want to seal up the edge so that it doesn't fray and it has a outwards decorative look. We use a flat fell with a top stitching application to give it strength. We use a double needle on a lap seam that will join panels together for larger pieces of fabric. And we have a French seam. The French seam being the most decorative in garments. It actually seals up the entire edge of the fabric so that it won't fray. And we also use serging to finish off the edges of raw edges. So those types of seams we're going to show you right now and how they're constructed. So the first seam that we're going to demonstrate is a flat fell seam. I've determined that my seam allowance is going to be 1/2 inch. I'm going to take my 2 panels of material, put them together, put them underneath the presser foot, hold my threads, my 1/2 inch guide. From there, stitch, back stitch. Hold your fabric in position and sew your 1/2 inch. Back stitch, locking the threads, needle bar up, pull your thread and clip. From there, we're going to take this panel and cut away the top layer inside the seam allowance and trimming it away. From there, we're going to take our fabric and open it up. I'm then going to fold the 1/2 inch edge over the edge that I just cut. Folding it over this way. And then taking it and folding it to the fabric this way. So now we're going to take our fabric ready to sew, spin it around, holding the top piece, pulling your threads back underneath the presser foot, holding those threads, start top stitching this piece that you just rolled over. Needle bar up, pull the threads, and clip them. This gives you a finished edge and what's called a flat fell seam. So the next seam that we're going to show you is a flat fell seam with top stitching. You'll take 2 pieces of material right sides together, 1/2 inch gauge, underneath the presser foot, hold the back threads, and start sewing. Back stitch. Again, aligning your edge because you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and sewing. Back stitch, needle bar up, pull your thread out. From there, we're going to take and open up this seam. This is your right sides up, and we're actually going to top stitch this 1/2 inch down. So on the right side of the fabric, sink your threads. I'm utilizing this edge for my guide. Back stitch. Again, pulling your material out, but not so hard that you see the stitch lines. Give that a gentle roll. Set that down. Hold it here because your bottom is tighter than your top because of the roll of the fabric. So I'm actually holding this down to the 1/2 inch seam allowance that's underneath. This will also help to minimize pucker. If you don't hold these apart, they'll want to roll together like this. Needle bar up, pull your material out, and you have a flat fell seam with a top stitch. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to put a lap seam together. Oftentimes used for larger panels in construction of bigger tarps. We can strengthen them by using a double needle stitch. In this case though, I'll show you how to do a double needle stitch with your single needle lock stitch machine. The first thing I determine is, what is my stitch width going to be? And a wonderful tool aid for me to use is seam tape. That way I get a consistent, in this case 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to take this tape and run it on the edge of this fabric. Seating it down, I'm going to peel away the wax paper so that the opposite side of the tape tacky is ready for my panel. I'm going to then join the two of them together and I'm ready to sew. Put it underneath the presser foot, and I'm actually using the inside of the guide, the inside foot, as a guide against the edge of this particular fabric. We're going to do a double needle application using this single needle lock stitch machine. You'll notice that I'm handling the fabric a little differently. It's just because of its size. Back stitch and pull out. You now have the first of 2 stitches. Using a double needle strengthens the fabric because of the load that's being put on it pulled. At this point, I'm going to use this edge riding against this stitch line to give me a nice even finish to this. Again, needle bar up, pull it out, and trim the threads. That gives me a beautiful 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch stitch, all the while catching the underside of the fabric. So now I'm going to demonstrate how to do a French seam. Oftentimes is used in garments to seal up the inside edges of garments so that they don't fray. But you can also find this seam in pillows and other decorative items in boats and home goods. Normally we would take fabric, our right sides together, but in this case a French seam has the wrong sides together to start with. We'll put it underneath the sewing machine. I've determined a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'll demonstrate why. Start sewing and back stitch. At that point, align your seams. I'm using the outside edge of this foot as my guide. And I just keep aligning. Back stitch, needle bar up, pull forward, and trim your threads. At that point, we're going to take and open this up, remembering that I have a raw edge on the top side of the fabric. I'm then going to fold this over. So I now have this beautiful hidden seam. I'm going to make sure that it's laying properly, so I'm going to roll the seam so that it will lay down nicely. And I've already determined that I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch in, remembering that I had a 1/4 inch on the inside seam. Underneath the foot, back stitch. Remember that this fabric has to roll. Run your finger down the seam to calm it down, temper it down, using your 1/2 inch gauge. If you don't, this is what's going to happen. You're going to bite in, you're going to sew a seam off. So you actually really need to make sure that that seam stays straight. Again, holding it. Bring it down. Back stitch. Needle bar up, pull your fabric out, clip your thread, and you now have a beautiful French seam. Face of the fabric completely clean, the back completely sealed, and that seam will never fray. In this video, we're going to show you how to finish off a seam, an edge, by serging. We've already stitched a 1/2 inch seam allowance on a single needle lock stitch. We are now taking it to this machine, which is a serger, which will finish off the edge. We want to align the edge of the fabric, the raw edge, to the edge of the plate on the sewing machine. We put it underneath the foot, and you start sewing. What will happen simultaneously is that the knife will actually cut off part of the material. Again, aligning it here, it cuts off a very small portion. You can adjust your seam in or out to make a smaller seam with the cuttings larger. Just guiding it. My fingers are guiding it this way and that. I'm actually pulling the fabric a little bit this way to guide it so that it doesn't spin. The knife is cutting fabric all the while, and it's giving us a beautiful edge so that the fabric never frays.